I've been playing Pax Dei a lot since the game went into early access, and here's what I think of it. Pax Dei is an MMO, but it's very different to the type of MMO that many of us are used to. There are no NPCs giving you quests, and there are no levels, and in many ways it's a return to the early days of MMOs, when games like Ultimate Online and Star Wars Galaxies try to create worlds for players to live in and to choose their own path. Unlike modern MMOs which sort of guide you down a path, a game like World of Warcraft tells you the story, basically tells you where to go and what to do to a very great extent. In other words, Pax Dei is a sandbox game, and in some ways it has more in common with survival games like Conan Exiles or Ark than with many modern MMOs. But it's definitely a massively multiplayer game. Even in early access, you'll see plenty of other players running around, and you see the houses that they've built. There's no instancing at all in the game as far as I can see. Speaking of housing, this is a game where you build your home, you place crafting stations in it, and you craft your own weapons, armor, food, potions, and plenty of other things. Or at least somebody has to do that, some player has to do that. Maybe you don't do it all yourself, but players do all this stuff. The crafting is incredibly complex and detailed. For example, I've been doing a lot of cooking in the game, and that turns out to involve a huge range of different things. You can level up your charcuterie skill, if I've pronounced that right, to get choice cuts of meat from animal carcasses, which you can then barbecue. While the actual cooking skill is used to make stews and fruit drinks. In addition, there's a baking skill for making bread, obviously, and distilling to make mead and ales and wines, and that's all part of the sort of general genre of cooking, and of course that's just one of many things you can do in a game. What I've discovered though is that you don't need to do all of this. You could just be a baker, for example, but it just goes to show how detailed the crafting is. It can also be a huge grind, although the grind in the current version of the game, the early access, is a lot less bad than in previous alpha versions that I also played. To level up weaponsmithing, for example, which obviously is going to be a popular skill, you need huge amounts of metal ingots, which basically requires ore, which you get from mining, and charcoal, which comes from chopping down trees to get wood, and then you have to burn the wood to make the charcoal. In addition, to make higher level items, you might need materials that come from other crafting professions like leatherworking and tailoring, for example. In theory, you don't need to grind, as there's no need to aim for the end gear straight away. You could just play the game almost as a sort of cozy game, just play the game and increase your skills over time, but I think we all know that's just not how MMOs players think. A lot of people will say that because of this, Pax Dei has to be played with a guild or with a group of friends. But that's not strictly true, as one character can learn every skill, it just takes time. But playing solo would definitely be hard. However, I think this might change when the devs add in trading. At the moment you can trade items with other players just by swapping items with them, but there's no currency in the game, there's no gold at the moment. There's no auction house and no vendors, so obviously trading is pretty hard to do. What's planned is that you will be able to build a market stall on your property, basically to build a little shop, and you can use that to sell items. And obviously you can also buy items from other people in the same way. And it seems to me that this would allow you to play solo as long as you have a good source of income. Maybe you have something to sell, maybe you could be a weaponsmith, but you buy armor and all the other stuff from someone else. Or it could involve hunting animals and selling the hides if you don't want to do crafting. Or it could just involve doing PvE in dungeons or encampments, which are already in the game, and actually doing PvE and getting loot from mobs. That's where you get materials used to craft magic items, and I imagine that's going to sell pretty well. Also, I would imagine enemy NPCs will sometimes drop gold, as there has to be a mechanism for getting gold coins into the economy somehow without any quests. Maybe it's just going to come as loot in PvE. That would seem to be the obvious thing. So I think the game will change dramatically when trading comes in, and solo play will be more viable when that happens. Of course, in a sense you won't be solo, because you'll still be working with other players in a sense by trading with them, so you still have the sort of massively multiplayer aspect of it, but you can probably do it without ever having to actually talk to another player. The game world is very beautiful, and it's a lot of fun seeing other people's buildings in the distance. So far, people have tended to congregate fairly near the starting areas. So you have some areas that are quite busy, lots of houses, which is nice to see. And then if you venture further out, there's a huge amount of untamed wilderness to explore. Lots of empty space without houses, but maybe stuff to find and collect. Gathering is good in this game if you enjoy gathering. There are some nice graphic effects when you chop down a tree, for example, or when you mine ore. And even if you don't really want to be a sort of full-time miner or whatever, you can do it when you want to do it. Just go out and do a bit of mining, and maybe you can sell your ore and get a bit of money that way once trading is in the game. Combat is very basic, and the devs say that this is a priority for them to improve. In melee combat, you basically use the left mouse button to attack and the right mouse button to block. Your weapons, including your shield if you have one, usually have a special ability which is on a cooldown, and you can use that by pressing the control key and the left or right mouse button at the same time. Blocking and special attacks use stamina, so you need to monitor your stamina to make sure you don't run out. You can equip any weapon at any time, and you gain skill in using the weapon the more that you use it. So your damage with a particular weapon will go up if you have lots of experience of using that weapon. But you can use any weapon anytime you like. There are bows in the game, and these are a little bit different to the melee weapons. You need to aim while taking into account the effects of gravity on your arrow. So you need to aim above your target, and the further away the target is, the higher you have to aim. And if you do it a lot, you get a good feel for where to aim, how to kill things. There's a good sense of achievement when your arrow actually hits its target, and it's a lot of fun. There's magic in the game, you can cast spells. Spells come from equipping magic items, which are crafted from materials found on bosses in PvE. These spells have pretty slow cast times, and at the moment people seem to use the spells as an addition to other forms of combat. Although my guess is that if you have enough spells equipped, it might be possible to play pretty much as a mage or healer. And one of the things that devs say they're working on is allowing more specialization for characters. So it will be possible, it seems, for your character perhaps to specialize in magic. Maybe they'll be able to specialize in using the bow as opposed to melee weapons or whatever. But more specialization. However, the goal seems to be to allow your character to do anything in theory, and what they can do will depend on the gear that they have equipped. So it's not that the character gets locked into a certain class, but it's just that at any given moment you specialize. You're better at some things than others. Maybe you can do certain things and you can't do certain other things because of the gear. And if you want to change, you can go back to your base, change your gear, get new different gear, assuming you have it, and then your character will play slightly differently after that. Most of the game world is currently PvE only, but there is a PvP zone where you can find some high-end items. However, there's little reason to fight other players at the moment. In the longer term, the goal is to allow players to form kingdoms which can go to war against each other, and apparently religion will play a role in this in some way. So this brings me to one of the big issues with Pax Dei at the moment, which is that it's a long way from being finished. There's a lot of things planned that are not in the game, and it won't be done for at the very least a year, according to the devs, and I imagine it's going to take longer. I've seen some very negative reviews of Pax Dei, stating that it's not ready for release, and that is obviously true, although strictly speaking, it hasn't actually been released yet. It's just in the early access, which isn't quite the same thing. But many people would argue that if you're charging for a game, and developers mainframe are charging at the moment for early access, then it's fair to judge any game on the basis of what you are actually going to get for your money right now. And that's fair enough. You can't argue with that. That's true. But I do think that's more of a criticism of the ethics of charging for early access rather than a real criticism of the game itself. Certainly, it doesn't tell you whether or not the game is going to be any good, whether or not it has any potential. Mainframe are charging people to beta test an early and unfinished version of the game, which perhaps is wrong, but I don't think this tells you that it's going to be a bad game. In fact, at this point, it looks to me like it's going to be really fun and interesting, and I can see myself sinking a huge amount of time into Pax Dei. As an old school MMO player, what I've always wanted is a modern version of those classic sandbox games like Ultima Online. And what we've got instead over many years is endless World of Warcraft clones, with a few exceptions. EVE Online is a good exception, but very few sandbox games. But now we do have one. We have Pax Dei, and I think it has loads of potential. It works, it looks beautiful, and there's already a lot to do. The game mod is massive, and when the time comes to expand the game, I think what's going to happen is they're going to add new features and systems rather than expanding the landmass. There's going to be more to do in the existing landmass, which is great. That's what we want. It's what EVE Online does, pretty much, and this is what I think we want in an MMO, not just new zones which make the old zones redundant. However, it's perfectly sensible to have doubts. The answer, in a sense, is simple. You could just say, well, wait until the game is finished and then decide whether or not it's worth checking out. You're going to have to wait a year or so, but judge the game on what it's like when it's finished. But one final thing I'd say is that I think Mainframe are in danger of losing a lot of goodwill with potential customers due to the way that they've approached this and due to their bad PR. MMO gamers are very sensitive to the idea that developers or publishers are using shady business practices, that they're just trying to get as much money as they can out of their players. And you see this sort of suspicious attitude, for example, in the way that whenever a new MMO is announced, people speculate about whether or not it's going to be pay to win. And even if the devs say, no, it's not, people say, well, yes, it is, I don't believe you, I think it will be. And that's understandable because we as players have been burnt so many times in the past. But it does mean that we tend to be very suspicious, and anybody working on a new MMO just needs to accept that as a fact. They need to think about how their decisions and announcements will be received by players. Now, personally, I'm glad that I have the chance to play Pax Dei now, and I paid my money for early access, knowing what I was getting. That was my choice, and I'm pleased with my choice. But there are some people who get mad at the idea of a game appearing on Steam as an early access game, when it's missing key features and when the game is a long way from being complete. And in a sense, it doesn't matter whether they're right or wrong. I mean, I don't think that's entirely fair, but it is an attitude a lot of people have, and it's just a fact that that's how people feel. There's a lot of them who feel that way, and they are very vocal. And Mainframe should perhaps have thought a bit more about how putting the game on Steam right now in this early state would be received. But I'm enjoying it. I'm going to enjoy it even more as new features are added, and I think I already know that I will definitely be playing this game at launch.